Those who know the incredible work of Mary Rodwell have heard her speak on numerous occasions about the amazing revelations that come through when she works with her clients in regression, many of whom learn that they have had a link to non-human intelligence. But not many have heard her speak along with one of those clients. Well, I recently had occasion to watch a regression of Mary's in its entirety, that of a woman named Kim, a dynamic individual in her own right, and one who, during her regression, learned that she's had a connection to non-human intelligence for perhaps multiple lifetimes. I was compelled to connect with Kim to hear her thoughts, along with Mary's, on this revelational regression experience, and happily they both accepted. What you are about to hear will no doubt cause you to think twice, not only about the idea that we share this universe with perhaps many beings, but how the multidimensional nature of reality is completely intertwined with our own. It's not often that I will have a guest on Conscious Inquiry Radio within a short span of time. Although many of my guests who have all brought such important information to the show are certainly invited back to share new insights, I still like to space it out a bit. But I have to tell you, Mary Rodwell, after all of the wonderful comments and feedback that I have received about having you on my program just this past January, I couldn't resist the temptation to dial you up again and have you on. I just couldn't wait. And I think our audience will be extremely pleased to hear you've joined us once again. But this time I thought we'd take a slightly different approach. Now, the first time I had you on, we discussed the case of a woman whom I know personally that had a regression which revealed a possible non-human connection, and that was obviously a great discussion. But this time I wanted to talk again about this human/non-human connection revealed through a regression experience, but have the actual individual join us to explain in her own words what this was like. And so it's my pleasure to welcome both you, Mary, and Kim Calkins, the subject of what I would call an amazing and touching story that is still unfolding to this day. So welcome to you both.
It's an absolute
Alexis.
pleasure.
Great to have you both on. Well, this is a full discussion, and I'd like to get some insight and some background for both of you. But Kim, let's start with you.
Okay.
Please, if you would give us a little background on what brought you to Mary Rodwell for your regression. For the audience, so you know, Mary Rodwell was the one to do the regression for Kim. But what brought you to this experience? I know you had mentioned you've had a lifetime of what you've described as high strangeness experiences that ultimately led you down this path. So what got you to Mary?
Well, I've from a young age, I was talking and seeing dead people and seeing and hearing things that other people couldn't see and hear. And I was fairly open about that. I shut it down for a long time just because my mother couldn't really handle it. But then I resumed this exploration and the really affirmation of these experiences when I got to be about 40. And but that said, I've had some other experiences that didn't fit into that kind of spiritual box, that I felt like I was experiencing these really beautiful and touching experiences, but there were some other experiences that I had remembered that just didn't fit in that box, and they had to do with ETs. And I always shunned away from expressing those or sharing those experiences with anyone because it was so touchy. It just didn't seem, if you're talking about angels, people are, oh, wow.
Right.
But if you talk about ETs, people go, oh, my gosh, So, but there were some things that had happened to me in my past and in some present circumstances that I just didn't have answers for. And after my husband died, I didn't have anybody to bounce these things off of. So I thought maybe I should explore this a little bit more. So I started Googling, past life regression ETs. And Barbara Lamb and Mary Rodwell's names came up over and over again. But when I saw Mary's picture, I knew she was the girl for me. But I really didn't think that she would be available because she's just gotten so darn famous. So I thought, well, I've got a couple girlfriends in Sedona, Arizona. I bet there's a regressionist on every street corner there. So I Googled past life regression, ETs, Sedona, Arizona. And the weirdest thing happened. The only person that showed up in the Google results with those search terms, hypnosis, regression, ETs, Sedona, Arizona, the only results that showed up were Mary Rodwell's results.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, whether or not she can make time for me, I don't know, but I've got to at least give it a shot. So I emailed her. And Mary very graciously emailed me back, and I was astounded. And then we finally talked, and we made an appointment, and she was willing to do a session with me, and I was just over the moon about this. So, and it was just an incredible experience. And Mary is a treasure.
I agreed wholeheartedly, and I can also say it was an incredible experience, even from it, viewing it from that standpoint. I have had the occasion to watch this regression in its entirety. Of course, we're going to get into that more. But thank you for sharing that with us, Kim. Well, Mary, you've been at this work for over 2 decades now, and I'm sure you've come close to probably perfecting a process that you use to put your clients in an altered and yet a conscious state, right? In order to gain access to this deeper part of their awareness. If you don't mind, could you explain a little bit about how this process works?
Well, what it really is, somebody needs to just feel trust enough to explore another part of their human experience from that deeper level. And the subconscious, and I call it stroke superconscious, is what we're accessing. We want to shut down the left brain, the conscious mind, sufficiently to see what's recorded on the subconscious tape, which doesn't edit an experience. It doesn't say that's not okay. It'll actually go and record whatever it is we've experienced, whether in a conscious state or a non-conscious state. So really, if I can encourage someone to feel safe enough to trust and let go of their conscious mind sufficiently, then we can see what the recording says. And the recording is one where you don't think first before you speak. You actually speak before you think. So as the question I'm asking comes up, then I'm talking to the subconscious to say, now what does this mean to you? And it really is about a trust process. It's also about intent, that you're coming from an intent of wanting to discover something from that deeper person. And it really is, for me, it's an amazing process, because it won't, it isn't like the left brain says that's not okay, or you can't go there. This isn't real. It doesn't say any of those messages. It just reveals whatever it needs to reveal. And my beginning of that process is to make sure that I know what that individual wants to find out. What is it they're seeking to understand? So I'm assisting them to find those deeper, to find answers to those deeper questions. So everything is around what they want to discover, they want to understand. It's not me saying I need to find this out about you. It's about them finding out more about themselves, which they may try to do via, relaxation or meditation. But often it's very hard to keep on track when you go in an altered state on your own. So my job is to keep somebody on track on that yellow brick road till they get the answers that they need.
And I know you've actually used the term staying on that yellow brick road. Well, this is fascinating to me as I'm listening to this, because, and although I don't know too much, certainly from a scientific perspective, on the levels of the brain states that we typically go through at some point in our lives, that being the alpha, and then I believe there's sort of a deep alpha, then a theta, and then of course the deepest being delta. Where would you say the majority of your clients are, Mary? We know that the alpha state is typically one that we can even go into while watching TV, and that's a whole other subject. But what would you say, particularly with the case of Kim? Because, I watched this, and it seemed like there was definitely a consciousness there, but I could also see that she was in an altered state. So what would you think that would be?
Well, it really depends. The individual, there's only about 20% of people that go into a somnambulistic state. And so most of the time my clients will not go that deep unless they've meditated for years and years. Mm. And they may go to a place where they really don't remember anything of the session whatsoever. Mm. It really is often the individual in terms of how they've got used to being in a particular trance state, how much they trust you, how many times you've maybe worked with them will depend on the level of depth of where they're actually going in terms of their state of trance. Mm-hmm. For me, it actually doesn't necessarily make any difference, mm-hmm. because as long as they're in an altered state and they're receptive and they're trusting, often you'll be surprised at what you can access, even in a very light trance. So, the first time it may be they'll be in a lighter trance simply because they don't know the process. But if they have worked on their spiritual selves and have done a lot of relaxation, or they're an intuitive, as Kim is, then often they will go into exactly the right, I'll call it a frequency, because I think it's about being in that frequency where they then can access their subconscious, superconscious, because I believe that's all intertwined, that they access that other more multidimensional aspect of themselves that is pulling in the information that they require.
Interesting. Well, let me pose this to Kim. Where do you feel, if you can describe it, where do you feel you were in terms of a frequency, we'll call it, being that you're somewhat, yeah.
I revisited the video of my session last night because I just wanted to refresh my memory, and I'm glad I did. And at one point, I did talk about my feet and legs are really talking to me now, I think is what I said on the recording. When I am vibrating at a different frequency, the first place I feel it typically is up through the bottoms of my feet. Mm-hmm. And so that's just sort of a sign for me that something's happening, or that maybe I'm more open or something. I really don't know. But as far as the session goes, I don't know too much about the different levels of consciousness. Mm-hmm. I was very relaxed, and I can say too that when Mary took me to each one of those places in my life where I had questions, I was there. I mean, I was there. And the first experience that I had in the session was when I was 6.
Mm-hmm. We're going to get into that. Yeah.
I have no conscious memory of that, but I'm telling you, I was there. Wow. And I think I talked to you yesterday just a little bit about this, was that it seems as though I've always had that memory now, that I've remembered it in this regression. It seems like that memory was always with me.
So the memory triggered the recall triggered the fact that you did have a memory about it.
That's how it seems like now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is a good time to just get into the meat of it. Let's get a bit into the regression, which, by the way, for our audience, Kim has been kind enough to allow me to repost in its entirety on the Higher Journeys YouTube channel, so you can listen to it right there, and we'll have a link posted for that right below this episode. But Kim, if you could give us a thumbnail of what this experience was like. We're starting to get into this already. In fact, let's just jump into that first scene of you being, I believe you said you were 6 years old?
Yes.
Here's a question I have for you. What was this memory, or this recall that triggered a memory of you being 6 years old in this life or a previous life? Do you know what I mean? In other words, you're 6 years old as Kim.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you something curious about that. When Mary had me look down, I looked down and she asked me where I was standing, and I was standing in green grass. And then I saw these little brown shoes on me. I don't know that I ever had a pair of brown shoes when I was little. My mother always had me in either black patent leather shoes or something else, but I don't really remember having little brown shoes like what I saw. So I really don't know. Honestly, I don't know whether it was this lifetime or another lifetime.
Okay.
I didn't recognize. Now, I saw this shed in front of me, or something that looked like a shed. I struggled between calling it a barn or a shed. But Mary and I talked afterward. Mary and I, after we talked, neither one of us was sure that that was really a shed. We were waiting for the door to open and to the shed. So it may have been something else altogether.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've also mentioned that there were several things, not just things, but beings in this scene, if you will, that, like a little dog that may or may not have been a dog. So as I watched, it seemed like you were sort of reaching for or struggling to see what, in fact, it was. So maybe talk, you know what, for our audience, so they're not like, what are they talking about? And again, you'll get a chance to see it in its entirety if you haven't already. But maybe you could give us just a little, if you can, even just the beginning of what was going on. You're 6 years old, there was a shed in front of you, and you had what beside you, and a little dog. Tell us about that.
Well, at first, I'm 6 years old. I'm in a little blue plaid dress. I have these brown shoes on with socks. I'm standing in grass. There's what looks like a shed in front of me. And at first, I didn't notice, or I didn't have an awareness that anyone was with me. But then as the session went on for a minute or so, then suddenly there are these two beings beside me. And I was able to look at them. I knew the one to my right. They were long and thin. Their heads were long. They didn't have any clothes on. But I struggled too with describing the color. I said brown, gold, yellow, brown, gold, yellow. They seemed to be illuminated in some way from within. I actually painted this, and I promised Mary I would send this to her, but it's such a bad painting. I was embarrassed to send it to her. But then there was this little, what I called a dog, and I struggled with this because it didn't really look like a dog, and it was very fleeting. It was in front of me at one moment. One moment it was further away from me. It got closer, and then suddenly it's gone. And Mary asked me where it was, and I felt like it was behind me. And it really looked more like a seal, and I struggled so hard to describe what this little being was. I called it a dog. It honestly didn't look anything like a dog. It looked more like a seal with 4 legs, and it did sort of prance. It kind of pranced around, and it had big eyes and very slick skin, or possibly fur. It wasn't furry, but it almost looked wet, like a seal looks. Mm-hmm. So, and I struggled with that image because I couldn't identify it, and so I struggled in identifying what that was really.
Right, you could see that. You could see that you were again reaching to try to. You say you were there, and yet there was obviously, I don't know whether there was a haziness or a tentativeness about it. And Mary, I recall you you kept pushing that point. I remember that part where you said, are you sure it's a dog? Could it be something else? And I think you had made reference that you got the sense that it was not. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it's a very interesting one, and it's something I'm always looking for when someone has extraterrestrial experiences, is that often they will initially see something that appears more normal because they want to see something more normal, and it's called a screen memory. And the screen, I think that these beings often will use the person's consciousness to create something more normal so they don't get scared. In other words. And what was interesting was the anomalousness of a dog being there. If she was having an experience where she was interacting with these beings, a dog is just not quite normal in the way that she described it. And that's why I pushed it, because I had a feeling that this was another screen. This was a screen for another being. And what was interesting was she was saying it wasn't acting normally, and it had big eyes, which is a giveaway.
Yeah.
And she also mentions, the skin not looking wet. Well, a lot of the little grey beings, their skin, those that have been touched by these beings, it's like dolphin skin. So I was aware of all of this, and this was what I was trying to do, was find out, was this in fact a dog, or was this a screen memory for one of these beings that she hadn't quite worked out yet? And if you push someone a little bit, then you can get them to see more clearly exactly what it is. It's anything anomalous in a scene that is can be a screen memory. And once you work in this field, you get to know how that can present. Somebody can see something they think is a helicopter when in fact it's a craft. But they'll say, oh, it's a helicopter. Oh, no, it isn't. It's a train. Oh, no, it's a... And then I'll say, now look again. And when they finally allow themselves to really see it, they will then see really what it is. And that goes for beings as well.
Yeah.
So, I say, do you sense anyone, anything around you? And that will often lead them to sensing the fact that they're accompanied or whatever. So it's just getting to know how to lead someone into understanding what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting dynamic, because as you're describing this, Mary, I'm wondering, if there is such a thing as a screen memory, or some sort of a screen or mask, let's just say, that presents itself, you wonder, is it the experiencer that's doing this as a sort of protective mechanism for what they don't really want to see? Or is it the beings themselves protecting their own identity? Or could it be a little bit of both?
It could be all of that. Those that are afraid of clowns, Santa Claus, or owls with big eyes are all screens for the beings. Now, whether or not the beings are utilizing your own consciousness to do this, or whether you're doing it to protect yourself, or whether it's a bit of both, I don't actually know for sure. But there's no doubt that the fear of clowns, or the fear of owls, or the fear of Santa Claus comes from a screen, and this experience often is not.
Yeah. You and I talked about that when we last spoke, Mary, about the fear of clowns, and drawing a correlation between the fear of clowns and perhaps their being not what we think they are. Excuse me. And that really sat with me for quite some time. And I know several people, all adults, who are mortified of clowns, and that always perplexed me because I've never been. So that definitely makes sense, as much as something like this can. So thank you for that. Well, as I've learned of individuals who've gone in for past life regressions, probably not expecting to discover this non-human connection, as it seems Kim has. But I find it interesting that there seems to be this sort of blurring of past incarnation with present day. In other words, I'll see if I can make myself clear. Are we addressing the individual, the experiencer, as having lived a previous life in this non-human form, but has still this alien aspect remained in some way, in some respect, in this current life? Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, so we're seeing a revelation. We're assuming, just like when we were speaking of Kim in her 6-year-old state, still not really sure whether it was 6 years old as Kim or 6 years old in another life. But either way, there is this blurring, it seems, because it's not that, okay, my previous life, I was an alien or connected to this family, but this time I'm just purely human. There's a blurring, it seems, that's coming out. Don't you agree?
I think some of the time that can happen, but most of the time the difference between their present life and other lives will become quite clear. I've had individuals that have found they've had extraterrestrial encounters in other lifetimes, and that has been quite fascinating. When they've least expected it, they've not known they've had any in this life, but when they've wanted to just do a past life regression, they have discovered they've had some interaction in another life, in medieval times, for example, or in some other scenario, or on other planets.
Well, maybe the proper word to use, rather than blurring, is bleed through. A bleed through of recollection, but it also seems, as you and I talked about, this is the interesting thing, the woman that I didn't regress, I call it the regression once removed, that Mary, you and I first talked about, we called her Kimberly. Talk about a synchronicity, Kim and Kimberly. But she, as well as someone else that I've recently interviewed, also talk about the possible connection that they have currently, even if it's seeing craft or having contact experiences in this life, along with previous existences as perhaps a non-human entity. So that, that's really what I was just curious to see if you've picked up on. So,
well, I can say this about my session. I had an unshakable sense that the beings that were presenting themselves to me, and who I finally, thanks to Mary, was able to identify, those beings have been with me from my origin, not from my birth in this lifetime, but from my origin. And there was a sense of, oh my goodness, timelessness and time before time during this session with these beings, the flicker beings and the beings that were, I don't know what I called them. They were the, I can't remember now. They looked like sheaths of light, and they were all connected. This came up with the strange pregnancy that I had.
Yeah.
And these light beings have been with me forever, and my understanding was they will always be with me forevermore. So there is this sense of having lived in probably not only many lifetimes on this earth, but in many forms and on and on and on. From the origin, that's a long time.
Yeah, if there even is such a thing. They say that there isn't really.
Yeah.
The alpha and the omega really don't exist. It's just constant.
Exactly.
But that's a very good point. I think that's relevant to what we're talking about here. Well, there's so many different points. And by the way, audience, this regression was about 2 hours, I believe, right?
Yeah, it was over 2 hours.
Over 2 hours. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I urge everyone, please treat yourself and watch this in its entirety. Take your time and really listen, because it's an emotional experience. I think you'll go along with Kim as she's having this, and it's fascinating to watch the process. But we can't go into all the elements here, and as much as I'd love to do that, we just won't have the time. So I guess what I would ask first you, Kim, and then Mary, you can chime in. Or what were some of the really key points that you might take from this experience of Kim, and moreover what we could all learn from these revelations that she had?
Well, I think the key point for me is that I'm never alone, and that there are a multitude of beings, endless beings, that take care of Kim Calkins, and that I'm never alone. And it just brings me to my knees to really internalize that, because I grew up in a time, in a place, and in a household that did not embrace the kinds of things that I was experiencing, so I had to shut it down. And that made me really, really lonely. So, I don't know, I've come out of the box now. I mean, I'm 63 years old, so what the heck? That's the key thing, is that I am never alone. And here's another key point. Even when things don't seem okay, all is good.
Say that one more time. Even when things aren't okay, they are always...
Even when things seem like they're not okay, all is good.
All is good.
It's all good. Yeah.
You told me a story offline yesterday that was so touching to me. I don't know if you want to get into it now, but really, sort of going through that point of feeling isolated and alone in your younger years, and you had said that you had sort of screamed out. I think a lot of us have done this, especially those of us that seem a bit different, interests are a bit different, and it's not being supported, where you simply cry out and scream out and say, what is this all about? What do you want? Whatever you might say. And you heard what back? You said you heard a voice. What did it say?
Well, I was screaming in the car because I was going through this period. I didn't know where this was coming from, but I would get so sad, just desperately sad when I left my house, and I'd get in the car. I'd have to drive to the grocery store a few miles away, and I'd get to the 3-mile mark, and I am just bawling my eyes out. And I started screaming to God. And I said, I can't live like this. I can't even go out of my house that I don't just crumble and fall apart with this unbelievable sadness. And he said, it's love. It's love. I just make it feel like sadness to get your attention.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yes, it is, and it changed my life. My husband passed away last November. When I get real sad and down, and I have terrible weepy days, believe me, I just remember that, and I remember this is the love I had for him. That's why these tears flow, because of the love that I have in my heart for him, and for everything, my chickens, my dog, my niece, my family. I have an abundance of love, and it's big. It's a big love.
Yeah, it's a big love. Well, this is, I'm just pausing for a minute because I think we all need to take this in. We hear this so often, almost to the point where some might call it cliche, although I don't think we can hear it enough, and that is, it is all about love. But the way the message came to you is that, I can't quote it, you just said it a moment ago, that it's love, and it's almost like I have to show you through the pain what love is. That's how you really understand what the love is. We've heard different variations of that, but I think, and the other thing is in the regression, of course, you bring that up so often that you've just felt this immense sense of love from these beings that you have been with eternally, perhaps. Mary, why don't you chime in a little bit here? I know it's really early there in Australia, but we're going to wake you up. So let's hear your thoughts on some of what Kim has to say.
Well, I love hearing Kim and how she expresses, because really this was her experience. What I believe happens when you work in this way with an individual, both of you are working together to get an understanding of why we're here, what it's all about, the mystery. And for Kim, it was all these questions she'd had all her life. And, it was, how can I get some understanding so I can make sense of it, so I can get on with life, Right. She'd lost lost her, her soulmate, this beautiful man that, was no longer with her. She'd had all these anomalies during her life where she didn't fully understand what it meant, past life recall that she was trying to understand. So there was in this matrix, and given her, I call our lovely, time of life where we're seeking to get some sense of our lives when we reach this point in our lives. All of us are the same. We're seeking to understand what is it all about. And it's not about getting, 2 cars and a big house and whatever. It's about making meaning or having meaning to our lives. So if you like, the intent of that was all of that in the mix. And so when I work with someone, the intent is, what is it that you are hoping to understand? And you're actually talking not only to your subconscious, I believe, but your superconscious, that higher part of you. And you're saying, I want answers. Please help me. Maybe the questions aren't quite right, but whatever it is, this is what I'm seeking. And that was the intent. And that intent brought me to work with her, because obviously for whatever reason, that was the mix that, the matrix or her aspect of herself needed to achieve. So I believe there's a very spiritual component to everyone I work with, that there is an understanding between souls, that we are working together, if you want to take it to that level. Yeah. So I'm part of that process because of whatever frequency or intent or whatever it is, the way that you work. What was wonderful and always is the most amazing thing, working with someone and someone as aware as Kim is, this is always a blessing, because I know we can go wherever she needs to go, because she's prepared to go anywhere she needs to go. So there are no boundaries. There's not, timelines. There's nothing about whether or not it's dimensional. This isn't intellectualized. It's the subconscious, superconscious saying, this is where I need to take you to find the answer to this. Wow. So it took her really not only into her understanding that she works with non-physical intelligences, depending on how you want to interpret them, light beings, angels, just whatever your belief system is, doesn't matter. There's still these beautiful beings that she's connected to from her origins. She got confirmation. She reconnected to that part of herself that is the multidimensional multidimensional part of herself. She also realized that this beautiful soul that she'd been living with physically was not gone. Mm-hmm. She felt him again because she was ready to embrace that understanding again. Mm-hmm. So she was able to connect to that. She was able to connect to her understanding of those lives that she'd previously suspected when she was in Mexico, for example, and got confirmation that this was a reality for her that was really important because it was part of her mystery, part of the not knowing that she wanted to understand. So because she was so open and so prepared and so ready, she was able to get and, understand all those mysteries that had gone on through her life. Mm-hmm. And for me, the package was there. Mm-hmm. It was everything that she'd sought to understand, and it made sense and it resonated. It wasn't for me to interpret that. That's her journey. She interpreted it, she understood it, and she got what she needed at that moment in time to move forward with that understanding. So for me, the blessing, the bouquet, if you like, is knowing that by the end of it, that this had profoundly shifted her understanding of herself, and realizing that she can continue to do that afterwards, that recording and that understanding now was with her, and she can continue to access more information via that process. So in a way, I've shown, look, the bike's there, you know how to ride it. Now, if you want to get really good at it, you continue riding the bike and you can find out more information, which is, to me, the blessing of all of it was that it helped her reach a new point in her understanding of herself.
Absolutely. I just see this, profound jumping off point or springboard for which to understanding from a whole different perspective, a shift of focus, not a complete shift, because like you said, Kim herself, very intuitive. I think she has a proclivity for that. Even just talking to her for a short time yesterday, I could hear that. But yeah, I love the analogy of the bike riding. If you keep practicing, and you'll get better at it, and you'll learn more tricks with the bike too. So, wow, that's powerful. And if it's for that reason alone, for really just understanding why we're here, what this is all about, it's no wonder I think so many people are looking in this direction, maybe not necessarily looking for the ET connection, but to try to put their lives in a broader context with previous existences, etc. Well, Kim, there was so much of your regression that yielded extraordinary insight into our possible connection to non-human entities. But I want to talk about something that perhaps takes the cake for high strangeness, as you so aptly called some of your experiences. And this happened all throughout the actual taping of the regression. Mysterious sounds were somehow picked up but not heard by you or Mary until the tape was played back. I could certainly hear it too. So, I want us to take a listen. Let's take a listen for a little bit to some of these strange sounds. And this is actual footage from the regression. And then we're going to weigh in on this anomaly. So let's take a listen.
I don't know if I'm hiding or they're hiding. They're so close.
Can they give you a form for you to connect to? Can you ask them to give you a kind of form so that you have a sense of them?
Oh. They're flickering. They flicker. They flicker.
Well, that makes for quite the mystery, doesn't it? Talk about high strangeness. And yet, if we try to break down what may be going on here, maybe we'll start to understand the mystery a little bit more. So I'd like each of you to give me your thoughts on what you think these variety of sounds may be all about. Whoever would like to chime in.
Kim, you go first.
Okay, initially I thought Mary had a clicker. And I thought she was operating some little mechanical device to get me to go deeper or something and this is not during the session. I heard none of this. Neither of us did. During the session, it was only after we watched the recording that I emailed her and I said, were you using some kind of clicking device? I've revisited my own recording many times, and every time I listen to it, I hear something more. Mm-hmm. It appears as though I'm being talked to. Mm-hmm. That's how it looks to me, and I've watched the recording many times. At first, I just heard the clicking, and then I heard some of the little whoops and kind of a heavy breathing throughout. It seemed to me as though I was being communicated with, and it seems to me that I had an understanding of that language, although I had no conscious awareness of hearing anything during the session itself. But that's how it appears to me. So I still can't offer any definitive answer to what that was because I'm only observing it and experiencing it through the recording itself.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
And neither one of you picked up on anything. There were no sound glitches during the recording itself. Because I'll tell you the truth, from my perspective, and by the way, audience, you only heard a small snippet of this. You have to hear the whole thing because you will clearly hear what we're talking about. It was overwhelming, really. And sometimes it seemed to me that it was coming from Mary's side. And by the way, this was done via Skype. With Mary, of course, in Australia, you at the time in Ohio. And I was trying to discern. Now, obviously, it couldn't have been brought up in the course of the session because you didn't hear it at that time. But I think it was you, Mary, that emailed me and even brought this point up to me when you wanted me to take a look at this, take a listen, really. Really, really something. Okay, let me stop babbling here because I want to stay on this for a little while. This is really something. Mary, what are your thoughts?
Well, high strangeness goes with the territory in my life, to be honest. I've had so many unusual things happen during regressions, including even some weird music that's come on a tape recorder of somebody going into a spacecraft, and we both heard it. We heard this strange music that was for a few seconds, and that we still have no idea how it got brought in such an obvious way. What I think was going on, first of all, some of the beings, particularly the manta beings, make clicking, sometimes clicking, trilling sounds, and I think when we're working multidimensionally, which is what we're doing when we tap into a lot of this information, is that those presences, those ones that have been supporting Kim all through her physical incarnation, I think they come and they're part of it. They are observing, they are supporting, and people will say, I feel energies in the room, or I'll feel presences in the room, and I know that that's what Kim was also feeling. Mm-hmm. And I think some of these intelligences that work with her on these other levels were probably there. And what's wonderful is they're making their presence known. It's like, yes, we're here. And on some level, with Kim, perhaps, she has a sense of what that might even be in terms of what they may be communicating if she taps into that part of herself, because she may have been one of those particular energies once, though, that were there, and that's how she communicated then. There's so much we don't know. I mean, I'm just looking, I'm looking at different hypotheses here, but I do know that the room is never empty when I am working with someone, either through Skype, which is amazing that this all can happen. But you see, if we understand the quantum universe and that we're all connected and we live in this matrix of consciousness, there is no distance. Mm-hmm. There is, I'm there energetically. I'm there. I know because I'm working with her consciousness and my consciousness, and we're all part of the consciousness. So, in terms of quantum physics, there's no anomaly. So in that sense, when you look at it from the understanding of what science is trying to understand now about the multidimensional nature of all of us, there is no separation. There is no such thing as space or distance. I am energetically with her, even though I'm speaking through a bit of technology. And with that, we're being supported by many non-physical beings, whether you call them angels or you call them guides or you call them teachers or you call them ETs or whatever. I believe it's all in the mix. So for me, they were making their presence known, and they were saying, hi, we're here, we're supporting you, and we're also letting you know that you're never alone. So for me, I just thought it was brilliant.
I thought it was as well. That now you can't, there is no movie, and I don't care what accoutrements they put in it to freak you out, not freak out, that's not the right word, but to really be compelling that we're not alone, that we're not, absolutely not alone. I can't wait for everyone to listen to this. Well, speaking of high strangeness, it goes on, I want to talk a little bit about one of the elements to the set of strange experiences each of these individuals, including Kimberly, who I interviewed, as well as another young lady, was the shadow being phenomenon. Kim, you and I spoke yesterday briefly about that. I don't know that you knew that term per se. My audience knows I've covered this subject in earnest, and just recently did an interview, in fact, with Rosemary Ellen Guiley, well-known paranormal researcher, as well as Sean Stone, both adept in the field of paranormal phenomena. But this is an absolutely fascinating area of research for me, in part because it seems that the experiencers follow certain experiential patterns, including ET visits and more. Let's talk about that a little bit. The shadow being connection. Kim and I spoke yesterday, and she revealed to me that she had something that I would describe as a shadow being visit. Let's go with Mary on this. What are your thoughts on, I know you're familiar with the phenomenon of how this may link, correlate, be quite common with ET experiencers, the shadow being phenomenon?
Well, what is, when I talk about anyone who's had encounters, whether they see it as abductions, experiences, or contact, or whatever, what seems to be the nature of the individual is that they are a lot more tapped into their multidimensional nature, which means that they are tapping in to other intelligences, energies through the matrix, whether you call that dimensions, parallel universes, or whatever. So, in fact, what we are, I believe, interacting with, whether we're aware of it or not, is those that are physical, non-physical, interdimensional, extra-dimensional, higher dimensional beings, right through to maybe even time travelers and whatever. So these beings, unlike the jinn, which are slightly different to the shadow beings, I believe those are interdimensional beings. And some of them are, it depends on, I think it's really difficult when people say, well, are they good, are they bad, or whatever. I'm very wary of saying that something is good or bad, because sometimes we are seeing through the lens of fear.
Right.
And it's really important that I say to individuals, because even with the beings, they may see, the little greys or the taller greys or the blue beings or whatever, and they will say, oh, but somebody said they were bad, or automatically they're making a judgment from somebody else's experience. And I'm saying that you have to trust your own resonance to what it is that you're experiencing, because that is the most important thing in your experience, to make your own have your own judgment on that. And the shadow beings are around. Lots of people see them, certainly when they see ETs or not. Some children see them, and some of them feel they're okay, they just watch and they just observe, and then they're not any kind of threat. Others feel that they are, and that they feel very unhappy about seeing them or experiencing them or whatever. So for me, they're just another aspect of what we call our multidimensional nature, that they are making their presence known. They're a different frequency. They're seen as a shadow because they're a different frequency to us, just as light beings are a different frequency and we see them as light. So the judgment is the thing I have problem with, because I often say, if you're seeing something there, ask it why it's there.
Yes.
And see what comes into your feeling, your sensing, and your knowing. Find out, talk to it, and see what you get, what you feel, what you sense. Because it's like anything. Have somebody come to the front door. What is it in you that with one person you'll invite them in for a cup of tea, and for somebody else you think, I'm not letting you pass the door.
That's absolutely right.
What is that?
Yeah.
You already have a sense by just seeing that and sensing that person whether they're safe or not safe for you. And it's exactly the same with the non-physical world. We feel and we sense and we know once we learn to trust that.
I think that is the most articulate explanation of that and the best advice I've heard to date. I got to tell you, I think you're absolutely right. We do have this habit. Us humans are habituated toward sort of following what we're, you say a word, what do you call that? When somebody says a word and the first thing that comes to your mind, association, essentially. So you think shadow, you say evil or devil, but there are connotations that are associated with these labels, and that's why I tend to not like to use labels, because they conjure up a certain sort of knee-jerk reaction. So I think that's great. Ask them, what is it that you want? And particularly with the shadow being phenomenon that you're right, so many people have. I've talked to so many lay people off the street that have told me they've had these experiences. They are, obviously they're very, very frightened. I forgot my point. I was about to make a really good point. But they're jumping to the conclusion that it's a bad thing. But ask them, what is it? Oh, I know what I was going to say. The really anomalous part of this is the sense of observation. They're in the doorway of your bedroom, not all the time, but a lot of the time, and they're simply looking at you. Well, what are you looking at? Ask them. Because, in most cases that I've heard, there's no physical, I shouldn't say that. There's some people have been accosted, actually. I have heard those cases, but I think that's the exception rather than the rule. But if they're observing, ask why. Maybe you'll get an answer, maybe you won't. But I think that's great advice. Would you like to share, Kim, the experience you shared with me about your sort of shadow experience? We won't even call it a being. Let's just call it a shadow that you said you saw.
Okay. First of all, Mary, that just is the way it is.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I talked about judgment, and I broke down in my session about judgment. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's exclusive to just humans. I think it's all inclusive of every being that exists everywhere. So I don't cast any judgment. I don't know why I don't go into fear. I just don't go into fear when I see something that I don't know or understand. I just don't go into fear. I become an observer. Mm-hmm. So when I was doing a healing session with a very, very close relative in my bedroom one afternoon, this very dark form came out of the wall and hovered above the relative that I was working on. She didn't see it. I saw it very clearly. But I just looked at it. It was observing. I didn't sense anything bad, and I don't think I would, because I had no judgment of this thing. It was dark. A lot of people say, oh, it was dark. It was a shadow being. You know those guys. Well, I don't, and I don't pass judgment upon what that is. It stayed for a while, it observed, and it just floated back into the wall. Just last week, when I was sleeping, I opened my eyes for some reason. I don't know why. I woke up. But there was a very large, dark shadow of a person in my doorway of my bedroom. And I keep the door open. And I understood immediately that it was a Native American woman. She was enormous. She was probably, 6 foot tall, at least. She took up the whole doorway. And I just acknowledged her energetically. I didn't sense any, and I don't ever sense any harm or evil intent. I just don't perceive that. So I acknowledged her. She was watching me sleep, and I went back to sleep. And that's all there was to it. So, I think many times we're too quick to judgment. Mm-hmm. Sure. And as you say, Alexis, we're too quick to adopt the beliefs of other people.
Yeah.
I just don't go there. I like to observe, and you learn so much more when you observe.
Here.
And
love it. Yeah.
that's when miracles happen, is when you just observe. That you're open, you're just observing, and all of a sudden something wonderful pops up that if you would have gone into fear might not have happened. You know? So that's kind of how I look at it. I don't put a lot of stock into labels and judgments. So, I've had some experiences with I suppose, beings that looked like they were in shadow.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Instead of see, again, I think we get into a little bit of trouble with our language and the associations with it. You know, we could do a whole dissertation. I've certainly thought about it on how language shapes worldview and our own lives. You know, we talk about. I'll give you another one. We don't have time to bring it up, but Mary, I was hoping to talk a little bit about the star seeds. It's another label, but it is what it is. Sometimes it's necessary in order to define and shape a conversation around it, or whatever it is we're talking about. But then you talk about the crystal and the indigo and the star children and the rainbow. And I know even for me, I tend to try not to use those labels because they will conjure up an absolute, well, if you're this, that means that. And I've always felt, even intuitively, that if we start to marry ourselves to labels too much, we'll inhibit the possibility of what they truly could be. So, yeah, I think that's a very important part of our evolution, really, is to, sometimes I wonder if the introduction of language was really kind of a curse on humanity rather than a gift. Because in a sense, I'm kind of serious, because here's the common thread, bringing it back to the ET reality, or whatever they may be, the non-human reality. What do we hear over and over and over again? They do not speak a language per se. In many cases, at least, it's a telepathic communication. Particularly, perhaps those that are at the higher realms have learned to, not use or negate the need for a language. So I think that's a fascinating topic. Maybe we'll have that one next. What do you think?
Well, I think the indigenous languages were pictorial languages. They spoke in pictures.
Yeah.
Like, I know that when I lived in Mexico, the Mayan people would tell me there's no word in the Mayan language for microwave, but they call it a fire box. Because there is a word for fire and there is a word for box.
Yeah.
And that's how I learned kind of some things about indigenous languages. But I think many of them are pictorial, so they don't have judgment attached to it. It is just this and this and this and this strung together to create a picture, so you can understand what the subject is.
Yeah, I think that we can learn a lot from that. And then, of course, you hear about universal language, right? And that's one that I think is more of a feeling than a spoken word, a universal language. Well, you know what we hear the universal language is, ladies? We know what that is. Love, right?
It's love.
It's love. Here we go again. Back to the same. Well, listen, we're running out of time real quick. I knew this was going to happen. So where do we go from here? We've got a few minutes left. How can we learn and grow from experiences like Kim and wisdom like from Mary, both of which so gracious to share their insights with us today? What's the next step, ladies, based on these ideas to our evolution as a human species, you think? That's just a little question. It's not a big question, right? What do you think?
Kim?
Well, I am a seed planter, and that's my job here. And she's not in the room right now, but my current harvest lies with my niece, my great niece. She lives with me now. And so I am being a seed planter with her, and I'm planting seeds that she's never had in her, her garden box before.
Uh-huh.
So it's wonderful. And she lives with me, so I'm watching this beautiful 20-year-old girl make different choices now. And she's seeing the results of those different choices, and that's kind of my job. And I hope too that with the regression, the tape recording, and I fervently hope that people are inspired by that in some way.
I
hope everybody gets something from that enriches their lives. Yeah. And that's kind of why I'm here. I'm just here to enrich people and plant a few seeds along the way and hope that they grow into a beautiful garden. And, I'm just staying on the same path that I've always been on.
Yeah. Wow. I know that this will be an inspiration to many. You certainly have been an inspiration to me. And I love the fact, I have a feeling you planted quite a few seeds that will invariably grow into beautiful, beautiful trees of wisdom, trees of knowledge. So, Mary, you're a gem, of course, for spending some time with me yet again. And as I said, people just can't get enough of your great work. And I'm certainly one of them. Please let us know, for those who don't know, where they can find you. I know a lot of people can. Where they can find you and what you're working on next.
Well, just Google Mary Rodwell and my website, ASCERN, will come up, and you will find a lot of information there. I'm also involved in the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for research into extraterrestrial encounters, which is bringing in a lot of academics and scientists, which is brilliant. The other aspect of this is my second book, The New Human, where I'm talking about the children and the teenagers that remember and recall quite consciously their experiences with the different intelligences, the ETs, also recall past lives on other planets, and why they've come to help us as a species wake up to who we really are. So that's what I'm in the process of writing now.
This had to be either a synchronicity or I had a little precognition, because just before we dialed in, which, by the way, audience, it took a little while to do. We're wondering if there was a little interference from our friends. But I thought, when is Mary coming out with another book? Because I know you have one, right? This will be your second?
Yes.
I'm so happy to hear that. So I hope I can get the scoop on that one when it comes out. When do you think it'll be released?
When God willing, and it gives me a bit of a hand, I suppose.
Well, we'll all send our energy your way on that, because I know everyone will be chomping at the bit to get their hands on that. That's great. And, I also want to make mention, Mary, of your wonderful questionnaire that you have available on your website. I should say questionnaires. There are several different sections. I had a chance to take a look today, and I'm sure one of the more popular questionnaires that you invite people to take is what you call indicators of alien abduction. Just a couple minutes left. Why don't you talk about that a little bit in that questionnaire?
Well, the starseed one is the one that those don't have what they would call an abduction type, but more a sense they belong to these different beings from other planets. And it's feeling always different, wondering why you're here, having a sense of mission, finding the way things are on this planet very primitive. They're the overall ones of the new human, the star seeds. I mean, we're all star seeds, really. We all come from the stars, but these are the more awake individuals that sense and feel they've come here with something to do. So, if you feel like, well, you've maybe never experienced that kind of more challenging connection to your non-human family, with these, you may just get a sense that this is who you are, that you've come here with something to do.
Fantastic. Well, of course, I urge everyone, of course, we'll have a link directly to the website, and perhaps I can put a link directly to the questionnaire right below this episode, so you can go and take that and ask yourself a few serious questions. This is great. Well, what can I say? Mary Rodwell, always a pleasure. Kim Calkins, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview.
It's been my pleasure, honey. Thank you.
It's been our pleasure to hear you. So thanks, ladies, and have a great day. There is no doubt that Kim clearly has the courage of her convictions, enough to explore the fantastic terrain of multidimensional reality that she's felt has been around her all of her life. Kim's regression with Mary Rodwell was, as she put it, a profound shift in the understanding about her life and what it all means. And for that, she is truly grateful. And I was certainly grateful to have both Kim and Mary share this amazing experience with all of us. If you haven't already, I encourage you to watch Kim's regression in its entirety at the link we've provided below. Thank you so much for tuning in to what is now called Higher Journeys Radio. Many of you know this show is Conscious Inquiry, but in the spirit of change, we thought it was time for a bit of a shift. So stay tuned for more frequent episodes and, of course, more great guests, presented in association with our friends at Conscious Life News. Until we meet again, I'm your host, Alexis Brooks.